Hey, this is Around the Circle. I'm Jeff Cook. I'm with the TJ Wilson.
Hello.
And we have Danielle Fuller. Danielle is Scientific Enneagram, and she is releasing a podcast with us on our channel in January 2026. And we're going to do a sneak peek and just talk about all the fun things that Danielle is going to do. So welcome, Danielle.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
I am thrilled to talk about your dreams and what's on your mind and the fantastic overlap, the necessary conversation topic of where Enneagram and science overlap, which is going to be exclusively the focus of your podcast, yeah?
Yeah, that is the goal.
So are we going to get to see any, chemical reactions or explode? Are we going to build a volcano? What's...
Going to turn each Enneagram type into a different molecule and then watch their reactions under a microscope.
Love it. I'm in.
No, we will not be going into it in that depth, at least as a start. Who knows what it'll evolve to. But yeah, it'll be a good little landing spot to talk about anything and everything, whether that's what are different psychological theories that have strong overlaps with Enneagram theory, whether that's looking at research studies that have been done, peer-reviewed published research on the Enneagram and what has that said, what has it not said, exploring some of the gaps and things that we would still love to explore and research. And then also hopefully talking to some other people in science fields like neuroscientists, maybe biologists, to see how they view the tie-ins between the Enneagram and the sciences.
It's perfect. We did a long interview with you earlier this year. It was one of our most popular podcasts of the year, and apparently there's a niche. So just to go basic for a second, when thinking about Enneagram and science, what are some of the first things that need to be said about the overlap?
Oh, that what is known is shaky at best. Everything right now, I would say, is still it's in the speculative stage. There's a lot of core issues about doing science with the Enneagram, which I'll touch on in one of my episodes on why it's so hard to do science with the Enneagram. But that's not to say that there can't be science done. I definitely want to make sure that it's clear. Jeff tells me I'm being overly self-deprecating, but I'm just being honest in that I am not an expert scientist in any of these fields, and I am not an expert Enneagram coach as well. I am a systems person, and I see these two systems that have interrelations and that nobody's connecting the two. So that's my goal with this podcast, is to kind of be that conduit back and forth of there are sciences that are looking at this. There's psychology that's looking at this or similar concepts. Then there's this Enneagram world. And instead of siloing the two, let's merge them together.
But the fact that you care about this is enough that it's worth listening to. And then if on the other end of it, we find out, oh, you don't know what you're talking about as you're talking about it, that's the point at which I'll back off. But,
my biggest nightmare.
Yeah. Well, everything I've heard so far, it seems like because you care about it, you know enough to know what you're talking about.
I will put in the work, the excessive amount of work needed to make sure that I say it most accurately as I can, and that if I do mess up and I say something wrong or misspeak, or somebody comes to me and says that's not actually what that research said, I am more than happy to correct that on a future episode.
Which is science.
Which is science.
Great. Yeah.
No one's meant to know everything. That's what research and ChatGPT are for.
I know that there's a huge need here for exactly some of the reasons that you're elevating, that it's tricky to show the bridge between Enneagram and science, in part because of what Enneagram is. It's not merely elusive at some levels because of so much of the self-reporting required. Mm-hmm. But it's also the case that, in my view, Enneagram is an incredibly complicated psychological theory of human motives. And that's not going to necessarily be like putting two chemicals together in a styrofoam volcano and seeing whether or not red foam comes out. It's going to require quite a bit more work. So when If you were just designing a study of, jumping into that initial overlap, Enneagram and sciences, what are some of the first steps that come to your mind?
Oh boy, like a study on the overlaps between the Enneagram and mental health issues, for example,
Yeah.
something like that.
So you
Yeah.
would get more specific and just kind of target something and say, well, let's see if we could
Yes.
answer
Yes.
this.
I don't think I don't know that you could do it broadly. Just with anything in science, the broader you get, the more fuzzy the data is and more unreliable. That's why there's things like meta-analyses, because they take people who did little bits here and there and then they amalgamate them together and try to paint the bigger picture with all the tiny pieces that are like slightly different than each other, but all in the same region. So there's no one size, like there's not one study that could be done that would say, yay, we understand science and the Enneagram now. It's going to be a buildup over decades of
Yeah.
people wanting to invest in the research and doing the research and having these conversations and exploring the relationships. But, in psychology, there's like the past, like originally psychology was focused on introspection, which is, your conscious mind. Let's look, okay, what do I see? What do I think? What do I feel? And then it kind of branched out into two schools of thought that were opposite of each other, between behaviorism and psychoanalysis, where psychoanalysis was like the flip side of introspection. It's okay, forget what you think you know, let's go a level deeper and find like that. And then behaviorism is, who cares what you're thinking? Let's only focus on what you do. And all three of those have kind of been co-opted now by the current cognitive revolution that's gone on, and is more focused on a little bit of all of that, because they all have their purposes and their reasons, but independently of each other, you're missing such a big part of human existence. So I see the Enneagram as being highly psychoanalytic. If you were to have like a pie chart with those three things, then all of it was cognitive. The psychoanalytic part really is kind of the foundation of the Enneagram. It's getting into that deeper sense of self-awareness that you have to kind of peel back the layers and understand yourself. But it also is how you behave in certain situations based on those motivations. And then it's also, you're having to use your introspection to reflect back on things. So it's all parts of that. They all have different ways of being studied, which again is why you couldn't have just one study to do this, because even if you just said, okay, we'll only do psychoanalytic evaluation, there's still issues with that. There's a reason that it isn't the primary way of doing therapy anymore. But you also couldn't just do behavioralist stuff. But then you could do, okay, cognitive, but that's going to require a lot of brain scans and like experts from all sorts of different fields. And hopefully we can get to that place eventually, but it's going to require a lot more work and a lot more cross-pollination. Is that the word? Cross-pollination?
sure.
Cross-pollination of the different fields of sciences, that I think right now there isn't necessarily an established body in each of those areas that would be poised to do it. So it's building up those different areas, making sure they talk, making sure they integrate in order to be able to get any sort of picture.
So there, as you were describing that, there's some, I couldn't help but thinking about, like, there's some parts of Enneagram teaching that talk about the three centers of intelligence, but it describes it as affective, effective, and theoretical, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that gets into like, you were describing essentially like an internal focus, an external focus, and then a way of sort of viewing the self in a little bit more holistic. And it just reminds me of like, there's so many things about what we're talking about that needs balance.
Mm-hmm.
Like, one of those things is really important, and it's not more important than any of the others. And the work that we're going to have to do is bring those things in balance, and that's true in the science as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's like the internal, external is like behavioral, and then the other side of behavioral is almost branched out to conscious and unconscious. But it's, what's going on inside that you know about and what's going inside that you don't know about. Those make up one piece, and then the counterbalance of that is behavioralism. They probably branch out too, that aren't coming to mind right now. But Yeah, we're complex beings.
Yep.
We do not have an easy way to describe 8 billion of us in one sentence or even one framework
Right.
that is created by flawed humans.
Yeah. And we still kind of don't know how our brains work. So, yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, when you started saying what is known as shaky, I was like, are you talking about science in general or Enneagram in particular? Because I assume that
Yes.
that we know that there's all sorts of stuff that isn't known. So
Yeah.
it's we get to just throw Enneagram into the basket of all the things that are shakily known.
Yep.
I had a 2-part question for you, and you'll see the back and forth here. But like when thinking about scientific concerns and Enneagram teachers, they're like science and like some Enneagram teachers just blow right past the sciences. What sort of things do Enneagram students, teachers need to take more seriously when thinking about the sciences and their own study of Enneagram?
You know, it's a good question. Spoiler alert, I don't have a good answer for you at the moment. I did a lot of interviews this year with different users of the Enneagram, anywhere from just the casual person who likes to scroll Instagram to the Enneagram coach to the therapist, Enneagram formed therapist, trying to understand how do you use it? What kind of science would you be interested in? How would it change or benefit you in your day-to-day life? And honestly, the summary of answers for especially just the casual learner was like, don't really care. If it's interesting, cool, but I'm there to scroll. And if it catches my attention, I'll read it. And if it doesn't, it won't. For coaches, the gist I got was that it's really interesting. They would love to be able to reference it and or send interested clients, like people who are more science-minded, in that direction, but that pretty much nothing that came out of Enneagram research would change their opinion on it. I'm sure that certain things could add some more nuance or some more depth, but essentially, anecdotally, they know it works, so they're going to continue coaching whether there's science or not. Therapists were the ones who tended to want more of the scientific backing because in order to use it in a practice, in a therapy practice, counseling, therapy, whatever, having that scientific backing helps a lot. And just like, there's a reason that people use CBT and other therapy modalities that have all of that scientific rigor. And if there was something similar with the Enneagram, they would be able to use it more often as opposed to offering it but then having to say, if somebody wasn't interested or wasn't familiar with it, they'll just use it in their own minds to kind of help structure the person from the therapist's opinion. But yeah, so all that to say, it's fascinating. I think that in modern day, we could use kind of more science in general. We could use science to inform things more often, and that we could all try to deviate away from clickbait and Instagram reels and news quote unquote sources to drive our thinking and focus more on what does the science actually say. In reality, there's a lot of flashing objects and shiny things that take our attention away from the boring science part of things. So I don't know. It's hard to tell people you should do something, you should do this, you should focus on science. That seems a little lecture-y, and I'm not here to lecture. I'm just here to provide cool information that I think is cool. And if it helps you, great. And if it doesn't, then that's fine. Go find something that you do enjoy.
On the flip side of that is like, what do you wish that scientists would take more seriously about personality typing theories?
Mm-hmm.
And part of your trailer for this podcast really goes into that. But I assume that you do see value for the scientific community in actually naming their motives and how they're coming to the world and what makes them different from others. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of psychologists or academics will dismiss the Enneagram as it's not scientifically backed. It's also not scientifically studied, so it's hard to say it's not scientifically backed if it wasn't really that studied. But it's, as I mentioned earlier, the Enneagram is so psychoanalytic, which is that underlying It's that underlying motive that you don't actually know. You really have to think hard and deep and be honest with yourself, which is really hard to do. It requires a lot. And Enneagram fundamentally requires so much pre-work in order to understand your type and to know it's your type, to have confidence in that it's your type, that doing research in any sort of qualitative way where you're gathering data, or I'm sorry, quantitative way where you're gathering data is always going to be called into question in the scientific community, because you're relying on those self-reports. You're relying on somebody saying, I am a type 3, and here are my answers to said survey for type 3. The problem, number one, is that how do you know they're a type 3? How do you gauge the reliability of that self-report data? And then the second issue is, okay, they're answering this psychometric scale that is putting in data on, I tend to feel like this when I do such and such, or when I experience such and such. A lot of those questions are behavioral in nature. It's what do you do under X? Or they're introspective in nature. It's I feel this way when such and such happens. So there's already a break in modalities between the psychoanalytic portion of the Enneagram of knowing yourself on a very deep level, and then the behavioral stuff and the introspection stuff, where the tools just start mixing. On the flip side, you have things like Big Five personality or Myers-Briggs. Those are used a lot when it comes to personality research and psychology. But again, they're behavioral. They're behavioral tools. It's like, do you act introverted or do you act extroverted? It's not, what's your deepest motivation and your biggest fear, and how do you react when you get stressed, and what wings can you naturally grow? It's much more direct, but I think you miss a lot of the nuance. You might understand that somebody typically acts introverted, but that doesn't tell you anything about the why they're acting introverted, which at the end of the day, the motive is what's driving us all. It's what I think people should care more about is motive than behavior, because once you start just reacting to behavior, then that behavior is going to change based on how you're reacting to behavior. And yeah, I think we would help us see each other more as humans if we were focused on motive as opposed to behavior on a regular basis.
So since you brought up qualitative versus quantitative and like Myers-Briggs, Big Five, Gallup strengths, these different things there is a decent amount of data out there about these. Like, I'm curious about, like, within the hierarchy of psychological science, let's pretend for a second that I'm someone who's only interested in concrete hard science, right? Like the thing that matters to me is numbers and repeatable results and blah blah, like quantitative data is the information that makes sense of the world to me. Does it matter within the bigger picture whether or not there is quantitative data within the Enneagram? Because I would assume that most psychology science is already leans qualitative in nature.
Not necessarily. It's actually any scientist is probably going to prefer, not any scientist, the majority of scientists are going to prefer quantitative data over qualitative data. They're definitely, I would say psychology is a healthy mix. There is a lot of, the statistics say that, there is a strong positive correlation between mental health issues and people who are high on the neuroticism scale of the Big Five. Like that data has been collected. There's a lot of different tools for gathering people's data, like psychometric scales on those that people can choose between that are validated in different levels. So I would at least the ones that I've come across have been more data focused.
Yeah.
The Enneagram itself is going to probably lend itself better to a narrative, qualitative approach. And I think the hard scientists are going to struggle with accepting that unless there is a large monumental body of evidence that can back up those qualitative claims.
Sure. Which it's entirely possible that there may never be that.
Right. Which I know there's plenty of, Narrative Enneagram as an organization has what, tens, hundreds of thousands of narrative stuff. Art of Growth guys have, you know, a ton of narrative explanations for this, but it's just putting it in a controlled scientific setting that's going to give it a little bit more sway, as opposed to somebody saying, well, yeah, I sent out a Google form and people typed in their answer and that's good enough, right? Like, there's going to be other, if you have the other steps and it was put through some sort of ethics review board, and you know that the way of gathering data was not manipulated and the questions were very specifically phrased to not be leading and all of that, and you can prove that, and you still are able to see the trends, I think that that could be a great selling point.
Sure.
Selling point is not a scientific category. The entire time that you've been talking, the thing that's been going through my head is that what the scientists have to learn about the Enneagram is that the Enneagram has to do with motive. There's a whole host of questions. I'm sure scientists know this. They're self-aware. The value of science itself is not a scientific matter. You can't prove the value of science based on science. That's a philosophical question. What counts as scientific evidence is not a scientific question. It's a philosophical question. When you bring in values of this sort, you're pushing into a part of humanity that isn't deductive in the way that we might like scientifically. You're pushing into values, and values, lo and behold, are based in large part on the motives of the people who are in charge. So maybe it would be valuable to study motivation.
Yep.
And especially if you think that science has something to say about everything, perhaps motivation should be one of the primary things that's considered, because it has such a massive influence on whether or not science itself is valued, whether or not what counts as scientific evidence, whether or not science gets funded, whether or not an entire culture can say science doesn't matter anymore and we're not going to take your silly, shots in the arm. All of these come out of a different place than scientific data. So to answer my own question, that's something the scientists should value about the Enneagram is actually trying to give some answers to the question, what motivates human beings, and to do it in a systematic form. And it is complicated, it is self-reporting, but there's lots that's probably could be said about it if the research and time was spent on it. There, I answered my own question. I don't have a follow-up to that. Do you have a response and I can move on?
No, you should have just answered your own question. You want to host this podcast?
I do. Oh, your podcast.
My God, yeah. Are you sure?
You are way more capable, qualified, and clearly have a passion for it. And I'm excited to be a consumer. Yeah. I will be subscriber number 1, actually. Okay. I actually am. I know this for a fact.
Well, and like the cynic, I can't help but think about like I kept wanting to say, but Jeff, who's gonna pay for it? Who's gonna sure, that matters, but how am I supposed to make money off of it?
Off of
and
this
this
podcast?
Off of
Science.
Doing the science on motivation. Like I think this is one of the
tobacco industry is gonna
is
gonna load us up.
I really think this is part of why there is not a lot of good science yet, is because there's no financial motivation to do science that isn't to sell something. And there's very little to sell when it comes to the Enneagram and the work that's being done there.
Yeah. Well, and it's a pretty saturated market. The reason I was doing a lot of those interviews was because I'm doing this as a hobby and a passion project. It's not my daily job. I get no money from doing the Instagram account or this podcast. It's literally just me enjoying something and it being a hobby. I would love to spend more time on it. I would love to do more pseudo-scientific studies where I follow scientific principles, but it's not backed by, a governing body or anything. I would love to do that as a 40-hour-a-week job. And there are 0 funding streams. So the interviews I was doing was to figure out, is there even a market to try to turn this into some sort of business model Could I go down that path? And unfortunately, as of right now, the answer is no, because the people willing to pay for it are not willing to pay a lot. And the vast majority of people are not willing to pay anything because there's so much information already out there, especially with the rise of AI. People can just, find things on their own, make their own conclusions. And there's just so far not a lot of value. But
to get way off topic, I'll tell you exactly where the money comes from. You convince grad students that this is a place that has gone unresearched, and there are literally thousands of PhDs in psychology waiting to be written by people who themselves are funding them. They're funding their own research, and I suppose that's the role of a university. And I suppose all psychological theories have probably had this hurdle. Like who's funding Jungian stuff? It's people that pick it up and in those sorts of spheres start working with it, starts teaching it. They produce, people who think that they're going to eventually go into therapy or into, psychiatry. Those would be the sources at the academic level. If you were going to fund it, it would probably be in those spheres.
yeah. And if money was no object, my ultimate goal would be to create some repository that has all of the published research that's been done with the findings. I don't know that I could put up the actual research articles themselves. I don't know how that works when you have to pay for access, but at least have like a database full of all, like where you could type in what has been done on autism and the Enneagram. And then there would be just a full table that populates with all of the different studies that have been done, a summary of here is what the overall takeaway was, here's where the disconnects are, here's some gaps that could still be filled with more research, and then also have a separate thing that starts capturing all of those potential studies with potential hypotheses or research statements that people that are in grad school, for example, could then farm out and look at that list and say, I'm willing to tackle that one, I'll take it. And then their results could then feed into the database and have it be a growing entity over time. That would be fantastic. Do I have the time or skills to do that on my own? I do not. But maybe someday, if I win the lottery, I can hire some programmers to help me with that.
Or hey, maybe there's some listeners who need to be directed to our Patreon page.
Well, there you go.
And they could help fund this. With all of our listeners' deep pockets.
I suppose my hope with our work and I suppose the investment in your podcast has been that I hope young people who are moving into those spaces where they have the time, energy, talent, and motive to do Enneagram study can at academic level, and that would be a real benefit. It's true the three of us aren't going to profit off this in that way, unless it were the case that you wanted to position yourself in such a way as to be a forerunner in the academy. Or the other obvious option is to try and sell it to advertising agencies who really are concerned with human motive. So if you
yeah,
want
but then I feel it's like a sellout. I
Yeah.
couldn't do it.
So there you go.
I don't want it to be a tool to be used against
So
people.
the
I want it to
money
be a
isn't
tool to help
really the
people.
issue. It's your conscience, Danielle.
Damn
That's
conscience.
why we're not
Morals.
rich.
Dang it.
Gonna go
Ruining
back to-
everything.
Everybody's got to fund their thing, but yeah, it's there's some people that collect boats, and there's some people that fly, remote control airplanes and go to Grateful Dead concerts, and
Yeah. It's okay to have a hobby. It's okay to fund your own hobby. That's, what you make money at a 9-to-5 for is to fund the fun parts of your life. And for me, the Enneagram is the fun part.
The thing about us is that our hobby actually has in my view, a significant contribution, has the potential to have a significant contribution to the thriving of human beings that we know and don't know around the world.
Yep.
Different kind of motive. Speaking of motive, but yeah, I don't know how to fund it. So of all things, there's not an established presence in the academy for Enneagram research, but there are quite a few Enneagram teachers around the world. Do you see any overlap between like what what collaboration might look like for those who are actually on the ground doing interviews, doing coaching, and studies that could be done?
Yeah, it's having like a central point person helping with those. That was something I looked into for a little bit was, we have all these coaches out doing their coaching and they'll probably take like a survey afterwards, like, how did you like my class? But having some sort of standardization between what those participants get afterwards and then compiling them all into a grand database would be great. Because right now, every single coach out there probably has their own statistics on how effective their course is, how many people figure out their type, what types that they're interviewing, but those are spread out across the 7 winds. And so bringing them all together in one spot would be super helpful, but it would have to also be collected in a very standardized format. You then have to start thinking also of, okay, well then how do you account for the differences in teaching strategy, the difference of, how many hours of training did the people get? Did they know about the Enneagram ahead of time? Do you do follow-up surveys to figure out, okay, people at the end of the class thought this thing, but then 3 months later, it was no longer making an impact in their life, or it is. There's a lot that goes into it, which is exciting to think about and talk about, but it's entirely feasible. It just requires somebody to put that together into like a scientifically backed survey of sorts. And then it requires buy-in from all of those coaches to use it.
As we're talking, I continually think like if you have folks who are in the academy and like have psychology teaching jobs, it gives you a platform for doing a lot of the things that you're talking about, and there's man hours there because you can recruit students to participate in that.
I see the value of that. And I also, similar to the Enneagram, I have a little bit of a qualm with like the foundations of psychology and Enneagram research, because it is so, like for psychology research, so much is predicated on the responses of college students. So that is a pretty narrow demographic in age. It is an educated population. It is a higher socioeconomic status, typically, population, because they can afford to go to college. It's not necessarily, and it's very westernized. A lot of the research has been done in the Western world, so it's hard to say that, when it was the psychological principles were built up by a bunch of white guys in Europe. So saying that, their form of what a healthy human mind, healthy interactions, healthy whatever, this is the ideal, was true for them, but there was no say from, South America, Latin America, Africa, Asia, like all indigenous America.
Women,
thank you. So I have issues with just in general, psychological studies are inherently biased towards young people, women, because almost every psych study that you see, it's all female students who are taking it. It's like 85+% female. So all young, female, educated, and have enough money to go to school. And it's like, they call it the weird demographic. It's Western educated something. I would have to look it up. But it's like essentially like the demographic of being like a bunch of waspy people is the primary. With the Enneagram, I think that it's probably a lot the same, maybe not as bad, but there's still a lot of assumptions about types that are made that I'll hear from people of color, or people who come from traumatic backgrounds, people from not from America who just don't associate with that. Like I have a friend who lives in France, and they literally do not have a term in French for people pleasing. That is not a thing.
Sure.
So when outside of France, we're like, okay, like people pleasing, that's like 2s and 9s, like their MO, they love people pleasing. But so that almost inherently rules out 2s and 9s from existing in French culture. But I also don't think that that's necessarily the case, because again, the motivation is there. So again, it's so impossible to explain and paint 8 billion people with one brush.
Yeah.
We can do our best.
Yeah. Well, and we can also consider like the United States in 2025 sort of leans toward favoring 3 and 8 qualities, right? But that is not true in France. That is not true in Eastern Asia. That's not true in Africa. Like there's so much variety within the way that culture itself expresses and values these different qualities. And,
Yep. Which I loved living in Scotland, because Scotland's the most benign country we've ever been part of. It was just, we're just let everybody live and let live.
Yeah.
Let's just not really fight about anything.
Yeah.
Just be polite. Enjoy nature.
And if we're gonna fight, we're at least gonna have a beer afterwards.
Exactly. We can like fight and then go grab a pint at the pub. It's fine.
Yeah.
You guys need to go rewatch Braveheart. What stands out to me is that
that was their 8-wing coming out.
That was something.
It was protective.
That happened so that they could become.
Leave us alone. We just want to live in peace. And if you won't let us, guess what? We're gonna pull out our counterphobic 6 stress. We're gonna pull out our
mace.
Our 8-wing is coming out in full force. Leave us alone.
One of those dudes put his sword through another guy's face. Your point actually proved an earlier point that what counts as scientific evidence isn't a scientific question in terms of saying here's what the control groups ought to be, and why not just people from Missouri? Why would this need to transcend certain barriers? That becomes a philosophical question. My point was actually that grad students can put together a database, not that they were going to be the ones who were getting studied.
Sorry, went off on my tangent, my soapbox.
But it's a very important topic in terms of how complex this sort of question is when coming to the sciences. And you're exactly right. We're making claims. Enneagram is making claims about 8 billion people, in that it's a theory about how human beings come to the world and trying to give language to all of their motives in a central system, which daunting topic. I love it. Just to circle back to the original, saying, well, let's just start with a small problem. We'll go with mental health. But out of that, I imagine there's going to have to be some of the big overarching theory, even though you're doing a small study. Yeah. So you're not necessarily sidestepping the enormity of the system and some of the issues that might emerge, correct? Even if you did a small study?
Correct. You would still look at the bigger picture, but then you have to fine tune your research question. Like, what are you specifically looking at? So, for example, I've recently found out that I am I'm high masking autistic. And I don't come across as autistic. I always assumed I wasn't, but it wasn't until the past couple months looking into it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I think that's why my brain does what it is. And it's a relief to look at. But personally, I was seeing so many overlaps between the high masking portion of it and my Enneagram 9-ness. And it made me wonder, I admit a hypothesis is there actually a pretty high number of Enneagram 9s who, especially female 9s, who are autistic? So a research question could be that, like, you're not presupposing anything. You're just saying, like, what is the percentage of Enneagram 9s who have autism, even if it's self-diagnosed and not a formal diagnosis? Because we know they won't go get diagnosed because they're a 9, because that's too much work.
I've made it this far without knowing that I'm autistic. I'll be fine.
Yeah, it's fine. I don't need to. But in order to do that, you would still have to look at the broader picture of autism and understand all of the nuances in and out, and then also the ins and outs of the Enneagram. So you'd be looking at it from a broad perspective of Enneagrams and 9-ness, and then mental health and autism. but then marrying the two and saying, okay, based on everything we know about all of this, let's see what we can do to answer this one little question right here. Which is why it just like can keep branching out and branching out, because you could do that exact same thing with every Enneagram type. You could do that exact same thing with every mental health issue. You can take mental health issues out of it completely and just look at birth order and every Enneagram type. So the opportunities are seemingly endless, which is overwhelming, but also awesome, because there's like no wrong question to ask. We just have to actually start asking them, actually start studying them. And then it's just like building a house brick by brick. It seems small, but it's still going to be a brick that builds the house at the end of the day.
Yeah. And it's not just brick by brick, but it's also bricks that literally support the other bricks.
Right. Right.
Like to find out that, like, if someone were to do a study and say, is there a correlation between high functioning autism and nineness? If the answer to that question is yes, then it can take us down a ton of other avenues. Like it lays a foundation for a ton of other work to be done.
Yep.
So,
yep. It has that opportunity. It also, just to a shout out to the file drawer problem, is also, if nothing comes of it, it should still be shared. And
Right.
if the answer is no, that's also important information to have. And too often people will do research and get no cool or interesting findings, and so they just put it in the file drawer. They won't publish it. Nobody wants to publish it because it's not earth-shattering, but that means that we're only knowing the cool stuff, and there could be, out of 100 studies that were done on something, maybe only 3 get published and they all have great findings, but 97 had no findings, and so they don't get published. That makes it seem like every single time you're going to get this result, this positive result, but in reality, it was only 3% of the time. So I'm an advocate for, I want more information, not filtered information. I want all of the information.
and I think that this may be not unique to nineness, but I think it's firmly seated in nineness as well. But like the more clear information we get that shows us that things are not black and white, the better. And humanity has a really hard time with that.
Yep.
Like because conspiracy theories are part of the conversation right now in a really big way. Like, the reality is that the proving or disproving the conspiracy is not going to change any minds. But if we can put more value into acknowledging that yes, we think that there is a correlation here, and it turns out there isn't, and that's okay. Like we see the world a little more clearly still, even if what we're seeing is that it's not as clear cut as we want it to be.
Yep.
In my world, in philosophy and in literature, there's the idea of critical methods, which is like you read a text according to a certain view. So like the feminist reading of Moby Dick or the Marxist reading of Tale of Two Cities. It's that sort of thing. So like I'm coming with this lens of interpretation. So in psych, I'm coming with a Jungian perspective when looking at mental health. I'm coming with a Freudian perspective when looking at autism. Enneagram strikes me as having that kind of power. It's not actually examining mental health. It's the lens through which you're looking at mental health in a new and different way. And that makes it a paradigm. It makes it something that has real power if it has traction. And so just naming the nature of what Enneagram is, it's not the thing being observed. Enneagram is the lenses through which you're observing. That's what needs to get named. And what most folks who are skeptical of Enneagram on the scientific front don't understand is it's a theory. It's a theory about human motivation. And theories are assumed. Theories are not proven. Theories are assumed, and then they show you what they show you. So it strikes me is the sort of work that you're pushing into is exactly the sort of thing that needs to happen. Is we just need passionate people who have kind of an experience of Enneagram and say, hey, this actually works for me. And they assume it when they come to their study of all the other things. And then they publish papers. They So I've talked to Danielle about this a handful of times, that I think the best thing to happen right now is a podcast like hers, and finding 10 folks in the sciences from different fields. Here's somebody in biology. Here's somebody, in neuroscience. Give me the Enneagram and chemistry, etc. Put it in a book. I imagine that would be an incredible benefit for the rest of us. So those sorts of things, I think that just real promise is out there. And so I'm so thrilled that your podcast is getting off the ground. It becomes a hub, as is, your work has been already. It becomes a hub for everything else. So
I hope so. Hope I don't let everybody down.
Yeah, you better not screw up, Danielle. There's going to be so much anger and chaos and tension coming at you.
No pressure. No pressure.
Do you guys got anything else before we sign off?
I guess if anybody listening is a scientist or knows of a scientist that would be good to talk to, an Enneagram-informed scientist, email me at hello@scientificenneagram.com or email Around the Circle guys, and we can get in touch with them, because I'd love to have some guests on. For right now, I'm just going to be monologuing for the most part, and eventually I would like to bring some people on so that people can hear other people's voices as well.
Is that invitation equal for haters, like Enneagram-informed scientists who think it's all a bunch of bunk? Do you want to talk to them too?
You know what? Sure. Let's open the conversation up.
Love it.
Yep.
I don't know any. I was just curious.
We can get a panel, like a whole, what was that? Crossfire? That Crossfire show back in the day. We can get like a pro and an against and just have them debate. I'll be the
just
moderator.
Talk over each other. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Having already done said debates, the only argument that's out there that I can tell is, hey, there's not enough literature.
There's not
on
enough
this.
research.
To which I say,
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
Guess what we're trying to do?
Yep.
No counterexamples, no anomalies. You need anomalies in order to disprove a paradigm. That's what I got. Danielle, I'm cheering for your work, and
Thank
I'm
you.
really excited to see what you do. Danielle's podcast is going to start in January 2026. It'll be the Scientific Enneagram. It'll likely release on Sundays until Jeff's programming notes bump it to Thursday, and then Tuesday, and then Friday, and who knows what'll happen. But I'm really excited to
about those
get.
executives.
But apparently, it doesn't really matter, as we talked about offline. Isn't that right, Teach?
Well, we'll also see what the Nielsen ratings come in at.
A scientific study, I will have you note.
It's self-reporting even.
No, you gotta have the little box, don't you?
Not anymore.
You just tell them what you watched.
I had to do Nielsen rating one time, and I literally was sent a paper log, and I had to write down what times and what shows and what channels and everything.
Does that count?
It was like
as
10 years ago.
self-reporting?
Yeah. I could have lied. I could have said I watched zero TV.
I didn't realize. Do they have to take that into account? Some of the people are
They better.
liars.
They better.
Well, and that's part of what streaming has done is show us that the Nielsen ratings are basically useless,
Is that right? Okay.
functionally useless.
Interesting. Wow. That's how much I know about TV and science. Well, she's Danielle Fuller. She's Scientific Enneagram. Again, get in touch with her at hello@scientificenneagram.com or on the Instagrams. And he's TJ Wilson, and he's officially awesome. Anything else, TJ?
I got nothing, ma'am.
I'm Jeff Cook. Who you aren't just isn't interesting. Hey friends, it's Jeff. We're entering a new season. We have started 4 new podcasts on this channel and are working on our second book and hoping to elevate more voices in the Enneagram world over the coming year. If these episodes are important to you, there's 3 things you can do for us. First, you can buy a copy of our first book, Around the Circle, on Amazon for yourself and your 10 closest friends for Christmas. Second, you can review that book or our podcast with a note, 5 stars. This really helps people find our feed. And best of all, you can go sign up as a member at aroundthecircle.org. Even free members get half of the stuff that we post there. So go books, stars, memberships. This will allow us to create great content for years to come. Appreciate all you all. Appreciate your notes of encouragement, and may all good things be yours.